Hello and welcome to the Wargamer, and you're joining me for another episode of Straightforward Tanks, the video series in which I show you how to paint World War II vehicles using nothing but an aerosol paint, normal acrylic paint and regular brush techniques. In this tutorial I'll be showing you how to paint the whitewashed armour effect that was often employed in the Battle of the Bulge, and I'll be using Warlord Games M18 Hellcat to do so. So here we have the Hellcat that I'll be painting in this tutorial, and as you can see I've already primed it using the Army Painter's matte white spray primer. Now the reason why I've started off white will become apparent very shortly, but it's a really nice and easy technique for whitewashing your winter vehicles. Now the first task in painting this vehicle is to get some really nice base colours on the armour. So first of all we're going to be using ash grey, and then we're going to be applying a wash of military shader. Now at the moment the white is looking very pristine, which is what we wouldn't expect from a whitewash, which has probably been applied quite haphazardly. Now what we want to do is create a nice streaky, almost dirty finish to the paint, and we're using some ash grey for this. Now I've got my monster brush here, and I've mixed in 2 parts medium to 1 part ash grey. And I've used the Army Paint as a medium, but if you have other mediums, you can use those instead. And what this does is it gives us a thin down effect, and what you'll be able to see is when I apply over the surface here, if I just angle it slightly, you can see when I apply it over the surface there, it gives a slightly streaky feel to it and also darkens it down ever so slightly as well. Now we want to focus this application mainly in the recesses, but make sure you do apply it across the surfaces as well. We'll be applying this across every single surface of the tank, which will be painted white ultimately. And you can see here I'm being quite not too careful or concerned about how I apply it, but you do want to kind of keep in mind how you would imagine the paint would have been applied. So I'm using long streaky motions. So for example on these panels here I'm going along in a horizontal pattern like so, and this will just imitate the effect of whitewashing being applied over the surface. Following the application of the ash grey, we've got this really nice grimy surface that we can build up from now. So I've got my military shader here, and I've mixed in some of the quick shade mixing medium from the Army Painter. However, you can use some other mediums or even just some water if you need to. And the intention of this is to thin down the military shader so that when we apply it over the surface, it's very, very thin indeed. And I'm applying it quite loosely. I'm not applying it in single strokes. As you can see here, I'm kind of breaking up the action a little bit, and this creates this very slight green tinge. And as you can see, this effect that we get from this is the effect of a whitewash over a green surface. So we're kind of painting it backwards, as opposed to painting green and then white over the top. We're actually painting white first and then applying green over like so. Now I'll be applying it over a couple of layers, so I'll be applying it very thinly at first and then building it up in certain areas where you would expect wear to occur. For example, especially around the crew compartments where you would imagine crew getting in and out of the vehicle, that would wear down the fastest, and also areas towards the bottom as well. So just apply this green wash over the entirety of the miniature and just apply it in specific areas where you would expect the wear to occur. With the wash completed, you can see we've got this really nice effect on the miniature, which looks like we have a green surface that's had a whitewash applied over the surface, and it's either faded or not been applied too thickly in certain areas. Now, as you can see, I've concentrated the wash in certain areas along the top where you'd imagine footfall and crews to be hanging around, and basically anywhere you would imagine the actual whitewash to be wearing off more lightly. So the next step is to enhance this effect and also add some dirt and grime to the miniature. It's still looking very clean at the moment. So first of all, we'll be starting off with a stippling of elf green before applying a wash of a soft tone ink. So for this step you want to grab yourself a small piece of sponge. I've got some here from a blister pack, and I've dipped in the tip there just some elf green and removed most of the excess off on a piece of paper. Now what we want to do is focus this around the edges where we'd expect areas of traffic to be most prevalent. So for example, especially around this open topped M18 here, you would imagine that around the top here you'd expect footfall to be greater, so I'm just going to be dabbing it onto the surface like so. And this creates almost like chips effect. I use this technique in my other tutorials for chipping, and it's pretty much the same technique here. We've just got to imagine bits of the whitewash have been worn off or removed, and we can just apply some more around here. Basically anywhere you would imagine either damage to occur or traffic from the crew walking in and out. So around the top there, around the hatches, and also on these flat areas at the back where you'd imagine crew would be standing. Following this stippling, you can see we've got a much more worn effect on the armour there, and we've still got this whitewash effect you can see very clearly we've got there. The next step is to really bring out some of these details and also add a little bit of grime into the recesses. Now I'm using soft tone ink for this. Now I've mixed in some water, so roughly 1 part water to soft tone ink, and I'm just going to be focusing this wash directly into these recesses like so. You can see as I just apply it on the seam there, it just enhances the seam colour. It also gives the illusion that mud and oil and other debris and grime is accumulated in these sections. As you can see here, we don't want to apply too much, because if we apply too much it will really contrast a lot against the quite pale background. So just apply a small amount, and again make sure you water it down. So now that the armour has a small layer of grime over the surface, now we can actually start focusing on some of the stowage items and also some of the tracks and the road wheel linings as well. Now we'll be painting all of these areas first of all with matte black, followed by a dry brush of gunmetal. So for this step I'm using the matte black, and I've mixed in just a small amount of water here just to improve the flow slightly, and once this is completed I'll be applying a second layer over the top. Now some of these items were actually painted over as part of the whitewash, and it's probably best just looking at some reference photos to see exactly which areas have been painted over for your particular vehicle. In this case I'm just going to be painting some of these additional items at the side with the black like so. And the same goes for when I come to paint the treads as well. So I'm going to be painting the actual rubber edges of these road wheels like so with the matte black. Just being careful not to overspill onto the areas that we've already painted. So with the black base coat applied, the next step is to dry brush over these areas using gunmetal. As you can see here, I've got my small dry brush, and I've removed most of the gunmetal off the surface. I've just wiped it onto a piece of paper, and I'm going to be very carefully dragging it along these areas that we painted in the previous step. And this just creates a very subtle, as you can see there just on the front, a very subtle metallic effect, which is perfect for the kind of gunmetal that we want to get the impression of, this darkened metal. I'll be doing this across the entirety of the miniature wherever I've painted the black sections in the previous step. The next step in painting this miniature is to paint some of the stowage items, particularly the handles on the axe and the sledgehammer that we've got here, and also on the spade that's on the back there. We'll be starting off with a base coat of oak brown, followed by a wash of strong tone ink, before finally highlighting with leather brown. So if, like me, you've painted these areas in the previous step black, it should be quite easy to cover over them with the oak brown. And as you can see here, I've just mixed in a small amount of water into the paint just to thin it down slightly and make it a lot easier to apply over the surface. And then once this layer has dried, I'll be applying a second coat over the top. Now you're pretty much going to be painting all the areas you would imagine being wood. So these rods here, and then also there's the few handles of the stowage items we've got scattered about the miniature. The next step is to just apply a quick wash over the surfaces of the brown areas we painted in the previous step. And this will just pool into the recesses, especially in these rods here, and really bring out the detail that we've got. With the wash dried, the next step in painting these wooden areas is to highlight them with leather brown. Now, I've got a very thin brush here with just a small amount of the leather brown just on the tip. And again, I've mixed in some water, as with the base coat, just to make the mixture a little bit more controllable. I'm just very carefully dragging this along these raised sections along the top here. Let's just really bring out the detail, make them stand out, especially against the white background that we've got going on here. And if you actually apply a streaking motion, you can actually create some nice textured effects on the wood as well. So with the wooden stowage items completed, the next step is to start painting some of the packs that we've got attached to the actual turret here. We're starting off with a base coat of combat fatigues, followed by a wash of mid-brown, before finally highlighting with drake tooth. So by applying the combat fatigues over these pouches, we get this nice greenish khaki colour. As you can see, it acts as a really nice base coat for the miniatures. Now what I've done here, as with my previous base coats, I've just mixed in a small amount of water, and then once this layer is dry, we're applying another layer over the top, and that'll really provide an excellent smooth coverage of a base layer that we can build up from. With the base coat completed, the next step is to wash over the surface using mid-brown, and this is a nice kind of a reddish brown colour, and it'll give us not only a darker base colour that we can highlight up from in the next step, but also pull into all these recesses you can see it's doing here. You know, really enhance some of these details that we've got in the fabric. Now the final step in painting the packs is to very carefully highlight some of these edges here with a very fine brush, just a small amount of drake tooth just on the tip of the brush. Again, mixing in a small amount of water just to make the flow of the paint easier to control. And I'm just using this brush to pick out some of these raised sections and also to enhance some of the folds in the fabric as well. With the stowage items completed, the next step is to start painting the headlights on the front of the miniature. Now we're starting off with a base coat of crystal blue, followed by a wash of dark tone ink. Now when painting these lenses, you do want to be very careful, especially on this particular tank, as you do have the covers there. Alternatively, you can leave gluing down these covers until after this step if you wanted to. So I'm just going to be very carefully painting the lens there with the crystal blue, and just being careful not to overspill onto the areas we've already painted. Now following the application of the base coat, we want to darken the colour slightly and really kind of bring out some of the shading around the edge of the headlight. So I've got some my dark tone ink here, and just a small amount on my brush. I'm going to be carefully applying that onto the surface of the spotlight like so. And this will pull into the recesses, and it will really make these headlights stand out. Now before I move on to the next step, you will notice that I've applied some transfers to the miniature, notably this on the side there, and also on the front as well, and also on the same on the other sides. Now I'll go into more detail on how I applied these in a later tutorial, dedicated tutorial, but quickly I've glossed over the surface, applied the decal, and then glossed over it again, and then I've sponged on some Alf Green over the surface to give it this worn effect. Now the reason why I've applied the decals at this stage is because the next step is to apply some mud and grime and various other amounts of dirt onto the miniature. And ideally we want the decals to be present so we can apply the dirt and grime over the top. Now the first task in applying this dirt and grime is to paint all of the tracks using leather brown. I'll be sponging that on and dry brushing on as well. The next step is to apply some oil marks using strong tone ink, and then finally we'll be doing some scorch marks using matte black. So for applying the leather brown, I'll begin using my sponging technique, and I've just got my sponge here with a small amount of leather brown onto the surface, and I've removed most of the actual leather brown from the sponge itself. I'm going to be applying this over the tracks quite liberally really. We want to really give the impression of mud that's ground in to these tracks, and what I'll be doing is I'll be applying several coats. So the reason why I sponge it on is because it really gives an ununiform approach, which is obviously what mud does. And if you sometimes apply it with a brush, it can look very uniform and doesn't look very realistic. So we want to apply several layers of the leather brown, and really you can cake it on as much as you want. It really is down to personal preference. Sometimes if you go too heavy though, it can just make it look like the whole bottom of the tank is just covered in mud, and it doesn't always look quite as good. It does obscure the details quite a lot. So as you can see here, I'm just making a nice thin coat of leather brown over all the tracks. So the next step is to apply some grease marks using strong tone ink. So what you want to do, you want to pick a point on the hull, for example just around this panel here, and you want to just apply a small amount around the section, and then just using a small line of strong tone ink, you can see that we can create this effect of oil dripping off the surface. And if I just apply it somewhere else, just do it as another example, so just apply a section here and just a very thin line dripping down the surface like so. Now you can also use this technique and this particular paint to enhance some of the panels as well dotted about the miniature. So you can also just apply a targeted wash inside some of these panels, and it's really just enhance the colour there. Now if you want to as well, you can also apply the strong tone ink wash over the muddy tracks that we've painted in some of the previous steps to just add a little bit of differential colour between the actual leather brown and the rest of the miniature. Now one of the final steps in painting this miniature is to paint some soot marks. Now I'll be applying these around the muzzle here, so I'm going to be applying some out of the muzzle brake, and if you want to imagine the actual exhaust emanating from the muzzle brake will be kind of going towards the actual barrel itself, so I'm going to be focusing it around this section here like so, and then also inside the barrel as well. It's quite difficult to see just on the camera there, but I'm just going to be focusing it around the actual end of the muzzle like so. And if you want to, you can also apply some of the same technique, dry brushing matte black onto the surface if you've got any exhaust or anything else on the miniature that you want to give the effect of soot build-up. So here we have the finished M18 Hellcat. Now whilst I focus on a US vehicle for this tutorial, you could apply it to any US vehicles, British vehicles, or even any Soviet vehicles. Now if you enjoyed this tutorial and would like to see more, do let me know in the comments below what kind of straightforward tanks tutorials you'd like to see me tackle in the future. And don't forget to subscribe to be kept up to date with all of my latest videos. You can also check out my Facebook and Instagram pages, which you can find links to in the description below, to be kept up to date with all the projects and videos that I'm working on. Now if you're a fan of my tutorials, be it straightforward tanks or anything else that I do, and would like to support me in making future videos, you can do so by heading on over to Patreon. And from there you can donate to me from as little as $1 a month, which will just really help me in producing future content. You can check out my Patreon page by clicking on the link on screen now, or checking out the link in the description below. And finally, if you haven't done so already, be sure to check out my previous tutorials in the Straightforward Tanks painting series. So until next time, thanks for watching, and goodbye.